we ready? Okay. Now, good afternoon. I think we have several on the phone. So we're not going to do introductions in the crowd, so we're just going to get this started. Just in case you're not aware, this is the Volkswagen Settlement Advisory Committee meeting. This is our first meeting. My name is Kira Moore. I'm the Director for the Air Pollution Control Program within the Department of Natural Resources. And before we get started, I would like to introduce the department staff that have been working on the Volkswagen. So first I'll start with my staff from the Air Program. Darcy Bybee, Emily Wilbur, Stacy Allen, and Mark Leith, and Shelley Reimer is back at the tables. There's a few other key people that have been helping us. Julia Kadich-Mudd from a General Counsel's office on the front row, and also Richard Waters from the General Counsel's office. And also Drew Bunton, our Deputy Department Director, is here. He's, I don't think, do you want to speak, Drew? Okay, all right. Just wanted to give you the opportunity. All right, so I know a lot of you, I've talked to a lot of you. I know there's a lot of interest in this money. The intention of this meeting is to kind of give a background of where's the money coming from, what we've been doing, and then I think you all are familiar with the settlement, but we're going to touch on a few general slides real quick. And then we want to hear from you. Our intent on this process is not to make the decisions. The department is not going to say, this is how we're going to spend this money. We want to hear from you. We want input from everyone. And that's one of the things that we are doing is forming this advisory committee. We've gotten a lot of questions on that, and I'll, if you have questions throughout this presentation, please feel free to ask them. This is pretty informal. Even though the room is set up like we're talking to you, I would like to have a bit of an interaction. So the advisory committee, our intention is not to limit it. So we're not going to select people. We did ask you to put on the website if you're interested in being in the advisory committee. It will probably evolve over time. We do intend to have this meeting in Jefferson City. We intend to give very similar meetings in St. Louis, Kansas City, and Springfield. Same presentation. The difference of those meetings will be the interaction and the comments we receive. And then most likely the rest of the meetings will be in Jefferson City, but if there's a need to have one in outstate area, we will do that. So like I said, we're just going to evolve this process as it goes along, but we want to hear from you. So I think I'm just going to jump into the presentation, and again, if you have any questions as I go through anything, please let me know. Let's try that again. Okay. I think it's on.
It's on the black screen button, I believe. There you go.
There we go. Okay. All right. I'm just going to go over a little background, and hopefully you all can see this. And then Darcy is going to give a little more background on the settlement options, and then Emily is going to show off our webpage and kind of show, if you're not familiar with it, how to find information on our webpage and how to interact with it. So, all right. Again, I'm just going to breeze through these slides because I think a lot of you are familiar with this. We do intend to place this presentation on the Volkswagen website, so you can go into more detail if you'd like. But obviously, there were some violations on Volkswagen's part, and there was a settlement. There are several settlements. However, the only one that we are involved in as a state of Missouri and the Department of Natural Resources is the Environmental Mitigation Trust Fund. So that's what we are going to cover today. Everything else, there are links on our webpage. If you own one of these cars and are not aware of how to handle it, there's a link on our webpage. Again, I think everyone's aware that this happened. 590,000 vehicles nationwide, 7,500 in the state of Missouri were affected. So we put this map together just to show where the affected vehicles were in the state of Missouri. And as you can probably predict, it's the larger metropolitan centers in the state of Missouri. The pie chart on the right, if you can see yours better than I can see mine, almost half are in the St. Louis area. Again, these are nitrogen dioxide emissions that we are concerned about that were exceeding federal standards, so that is what the settlement focuses on. And again, a few information slides on NOx that I'm not going to go over again in detail. This also summarizes the nitrogen dioxide emission sources in the state of Missouri. So again, this will be on the website and you can reference this for future reference. Okay, this lists the top diesel sources and also kind of gives you a segue into projects that we're probably going to look at with this settlement. And then this is why we're here today, the Environmental Mitigation Trust Fund. Volkswagen paid or is going to pay $2.9 billion for this Environmental Mitigation Trust Fund. It is divided up in the states based on the number of vehicles each state has. Missouri's share of this trust is $41 million. This isn't a pot of money that comes to the state. It is a pot of money that is handled by the trustee that the state allows the use of. The trustee is Wilmington Trust, and they are managing this fund, and they do have their own website regarding this fund. Okay. I'm going to ask if anyone's on the phone watching the live stream, if you can mute your phone. There is a delay in the sound on a live stream, and it comes back through our phone. So I experienced that at our commission meeting last week. It's a little unsettling. So, okay, I think Darcy's going to take over. Does anyone have any questions yet? Okay.
All right. Good afternoon. My name's Darcy Bybee. I work in the Air Quality Planning section at the Air Pollution Control Program. I'm going to present to you today some information on the Beneficiary Mitigation Plan and the projects that are outlined in the settlement. A couple things I wanted to point out on this slide. I'm really going to leave the majority of this information to Emily because these little snippets here are from the webpage, and she's going to go through that information with you later on today. But I wanted to point out a term here that I'm going to probably use interchangeably, lead agency and beneficiary. The state of Missouri is the beneficiary, as Kira mentioned, of the $41 million or so dollars. The Missouri Department of Natural Resources is the lead agency, which means we're responsible for working with you guys, working with everyone to make sure that we get a beneficiary mitigation plan that's appropriate for Missouri and able to spend that money. So in case I use those interchangeably, I'm thinking of us all together here working to spend that money throughout the next 8-10 years or so. So Emily will go through these individual little snippets for you later on through the web page. I'm going to move on and talk about the mitigation plan itself. So the mitigation plan is intended at this point to be really a high-level summary, a high-level look for the citizens as to how we will spend the money. In fact, the consent decree states that the beneficiary mitigation plan need only provide the level of detail reasonably ascertainable at the time of submission. Really, again, just to provide the public with our high-level vision for how to spend the money, and it can be modified and updated as time goes on. 10 years is a long time. A lot can happen in that period of time, and so we'll want to make sure that we do, if needed, update the plan to more accurately reflect the best path forward for us. Looking at the plan, in our minds, these bullets here are the main components for the plan. We'll need to be thinking about the type of projects that will be included. As we mentioned, the consent decree or the settlement does talk about 10 different categories of projects that the money can be spent on. We look forward to working with everybody to make sure which of those categories of projects are appropriate, which we have projects ready to go, which are the best to be included in the plan. We'll want to talk about the amounts dedicated to the various project types, both in regards to what percentage maybe of the $41 million and also what percentage of reimbursement we believe is appropriate for these types of projects. We'll want to think about the process and timing for selecting and doing the projects. Like I keep talking about a 10-year plan, we need to be thinking about making sure that we spend it all because it's possible that if other states don't spend their money, that we might have additional money given to us later on in the process. We can't spend any more than 1/3 in the first year or 2/3 in the second year, but that opens up quite a bit of money, even if you only look at that small percentage. We'll want to be thinking about the target areas for projects, maybe considering air quality and sources of NOx emissions, looking at the location of the affected VW vehicles. Both of those are important things to consider. We know that ozone, NOx is a precursor to ozone. We do have one ozone non-attainment area in the state currently, and we do have several large sources of NOx emissions, but then we have to balance that with where those vehicles were, are, or will be operated. The mitigation fund is intended to fully mitigate those excess emissions from those vehicles, and so we need to really be thinking of this holistically across the state. And then finally, the mitigation plan will need to have estimated emission reductions. We need to make sure that where we spend the money gives us an environmental bang for that buck. This is a similar map to what Kira showed you. This is just a heat map that shows you those areas in the state where those vehicles were registered. This is based on 2014 registration data, so it's a little outdated. But again, as she mentioned, we've got the St. Louis and Kansas City areas, followed closely by Springfield and Boone County, and then scattered throughout the state. We do know that vehicles aren't operated only in the area which they're registered. They tend to take you from place to place. Ozone tends to be a transport type issue, and so we do want to look statewide in our discussions with you to decide how to appropriately spend the money. The consent decree, as we mentioned, outlines 10 eligible mitigation actions. I've got a slide or two on all of these different types of projects. I'm going to do my best to move through them pretty quickly. The intent, as Kira mentioned, that this will be posted online, and perhaps during our discussions we might want to pop back to a specific slide to remind you. But just to kind of frame our discussion, these 10 projects, we've got the large trucks, Class 8, school shuttle transit buses, locomotives, ferries, tugboats, marine shore power, medium trucks, Class 4 to 7, aircraft service equipment, forklifts and cargo handling equipment, charging stations for electric vehicles, and then the DERA option. So we'll go through those pretty quickly, probably even more quickly than it took me to go through this slide. We'll start with the large and medium trucks, so we're going to combine projects 1 and 6 from the previous slide. So we have a slide similar to this for each of the types of projects, just to kind of give you the framework of what we're looking at here. So we've got some cute little pictures to describe to you what types what types of trucks that these classes are. On the left-hand side, you can see the repowers, that means a new engine. On the right side, replacements, so that's a whole new truck. And then in the boxes, we have it broken down by what I'm going to call the up to numbers. You'll hear me say several times probably up to a certain percentage. Those numbers are from the consent decree, and so basically it outlines the maximum amount that the consent decree speculates that we could reimburse for those types of projects. In general, government-owned is generally going to be an up to 100%. For new diesel, alternative fuel, or all electric. That's the same here for large and medium trucks, repowers, and replacements. The non-government owned typically is going to be under the replacements, and I can't read that, 25% for new diesel or alternative, and 75% for all electric. Non-government owned, up to 40% for new diesel or alternative fuel, 75% for all electric. If there's any questions, make sure and stop me. I'm going to try and buzz through these rather quickly. Moving on to school, shuttle, and transit buses, you'll see the similar percentages, 100% for government-owned, and then non-government-owned repowers and replacements between 25, 40, and 75%, depending upon the fuel. Looking at switchyard locomotives, again, 100% repowers and replacements for government-owned, and then the 25, 40, and 75% for non-government-owned, depending upon the fuel. Ferries and tugboats, this one will be a little bit different in that the consent decree settlement only talks about funding repowerings, so the new engine. It will not cover replacements of a brand new ferry or tugboat. But again, the percentage will be the same for the repowers, 100% for government-owned, non-government-owned, 40% for diesel or alternative fuel, and 75% for all electric. Marine shore power. So in case you're not familiar with these are systems installed on marine vessels and at ports so that the vessel's main and auxiliary engines don't have to be on. Government-owned 100% and non-government-owned 25%. Airport ground support equipment. This gets us into a couple of slides where we're only going to be talking about electric. So for airport ground support equipment, for repowers and replacements, again, government-owned up to 100% for new all-electric. Non-government-owned 75%, up to 75% for repowers, and non-government-owned up to 75% as well. Looking at forklifts and cargo handling equipment, very similar to the airport ground support, only electric, and the 100% for government-owned and up to 75% for non-government-owned. For these I actually have two slides on the zero-emission vehicle equipment. So this is where we're going to talk about infrastructure, mainly for or only for electric vehicles and hydrogen fuel cells. So the first of two slides looking at electric vehicles, level 1, 2, or fast charging, and must be in a public place, workplace, or multi-unit dwelling. The hydrogen fuel cell must be publicly available with a dispensing pressure of 70 megapascals. Our percent slide, looking at electric vehicles up to, again, 100% for government-owned public, up to 80% for privately owned public charging stations, up to 60% for charging stations at workplace or multi-unit abodes. Hydrogen fuel cell will be based upon dispensing capacity at either 33% or up to 25%. So there's the first 9 projects. Before we get to our official project number 10 slide, I wanted to frame this for you with the DERA, the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act. Many of you in this room are probably very familiar with DERA. We at the department have been implementing DERA for about, 8 years or so, since 2008. It is a federal program. It does change a little bit every year, and it is subject to congressional appropriations. But the reason we bring DERA up now is because there is a DERA option under the Volkswagen settlement. In my mind, there's 2 benefits for utilizing the DERA option. One is financial. You can see here on this slide. By using the Volkswagen's funds as our match for the DERA funds, we do actually get a 50% bonus. The other benefit or incentive for using the DERA option is that it does open the consent decree or the settlement up for additional projects. So here's a slide with just a short list of things that in our minds we would be able to do beyond the original 10 projects if we were to do this DERA option. So for example, long-haul locomotives, construction equipment, transport refrigeration units, there's just additional types of projects that can be funded using this option. One thing we wanted to make sure and remind you of is similar to DERA, under the Volkswagen settlement, those vehicles or engines that are reimbursed and replaced must be scrapped. So just as a reminder, engine scrappage means that there is a drill or a 3-inch hole put into the engine block, and the vehicle itself, when replaced, does have to have the frame cut in half. And since my presentation has been kind of dry so far, here's some cool pictures in case you have ever been to see one of these. It's really neat. I've not been to one yet, but several of our DERA folks have been out to look at these. I don't know what school district this is. It doesn't really matter because it's just a cool picture. So you can see the movement of, or the end result of, the scrapping and the cutting in half of the bus and the drilling in the holes of the engine. So here's a school bus, and here is a tugboat engine. So part of the process will be whenever a vehicle or an engine is replaced, we will, or someone will have to come out and verify that that is done. And that's similar to the DERA program. We would have these pictures as documentation. So what's all this mean? We've got a lot of stuff going on. We got a long ways to go and not a lot of time to get there, as they say. So happy late TED Day for those of you that didn't hear me say that already when it was funny back at the beginning of October. But the trust effective date was October 2nd, which kicked off the process for us to move through this beneficiary mitigation process. So we're actually early on our timeline so far. Hopefully we can keep on track, but our timeline here says November of starting, I guess, Wednesday, Through next January, we'll be holding outreach and advisory committee meetings to get input. Emily will go through our webpage, as I mentioned, and she'll show you some other ways that we've been collecting input. There is one piece left for the beneficiary certification form to be submitted one additional way through the process, but we hope we will have that done no later than end of November, but no later than December 1st. The trustee, Wilmington Trust, will be officially approving those certifications for the beneficiaries, the states, in next January is the thought. We hope, if we can get through and we don't have any weather delays or anything like that, we hope to have a plan out for public comment in the February to March timeframe, and then being able to submit it to the trustee, Wilmington Trust, in the April to May of next year timeframe. All of that would put us on potentially a track to start funding projects next spring or summer. So it's very exciting. There's a lot to happen between now and then, but I think we've got a good start, at least by meeting today and getting the word out. Here's a slide just to remind you of some resources that are out there. We have our settlement webpage listed first, EPA's next, and then a couple of other settlement web pages you may be interested in, and then the final link is the court settlement documents. One thing I did not mention that I had intended to is that these slides were prepared off of the settlement document, and so if there is a question, we may want to refer back to that to ensure that we're in line with the settlement at this point. So you can find all of those at that last link. And with that, if there's any questions so far, I'd be happy to take them or defer to the peanut gallery. They can help me answer. And then Emily's going to give a webpage tour. Or if there's anything that I missed that you guys wanted me to say. Okay. All right.
All right. I don't know if this is on or if I have to move it closer. Okay, good. Yeah, hopefully you guys can hear me. If I start to fade out, then you guys give me a signal. I'm Emily Wilbur, and I'm going to be your tour guide today through our webpage. You can get to our webpage through this link here, but I'm going to, let's see, how do I do this? Escape. I'm going to go ahead and go. The web pages the address is also on the agenda today for your convenience, so you can take that with you and go to our web page at any time. There's a couple of different ways you can get to this web page. Oh, there's a couple. Okay. Whoa, I'll just bring it closer there. There's a couple of different ways you can get to our web page. If you go to the main DNR web page, homepage, it's dnr.mo.gov. You can see that we have a link right here. I don't know if you can see where my cursor is, that says Volkswagen Settlement. You click on that, it'll take you back to our main VW webpage. Also, if you're on the AIR program's homepage already, you can use the right-hand directory here, scroll down, and there's a link to the VW Settlement webpage down here. So those are a couple of ways that you can get to our VW webpage. This is the page that you'll come to connect to all the information that the AIR program has to offer about the VW settlement. If you saw in the back, we did have some handouts. The fact sheet is located right here at the bottom. You can click on that, and it'll take you to the fact sheet. If you're interested in Consumer Relief Program, there's a link to that down here. But more importantly, I'm going to talk about these 6 boxes here today. These 6 boxes represent the different level of involvement that you can have while we develop the mitigation plan. If you just want to learn more about the settlement, about public health effects, or how Missouri fits into the big picture, you can click on the Learn More box right here, and it'll take you to this webpage where it has more information about the background and different links. If you want to get our email updates, you can click on the Stay Informed box right here, and it'll take you to another web page where you can insert your email address, and you'll be added to our listserv, where if we have any updates that we're going to send out through email, then you'll automatically get those. If you go down here to the lower right-hand corner, you'll see that there's an Apply for Funding button. And if you try to click on it, nothing's going to happen. There's no information available here right now, but this is where we envision where we're going to add all the information about our mitigation, beneficiary mitigation plan, and that we're developing. So, like Darcy talked about, we are looking for input on how we're going to develop our plan. And so the last three text boxes here will help you get involved. You can attend one of our meetings, and if you click on this button here, you can go to the webpage where we have all the information about all the upcoming meetings across the state. We have a meeting in Kansas City, St. Louis, and Springfield set up, and you can find out more information about it here. And like Darcy, or I think it was Kira or Darcy said that at each one of these meetings, you can come and participate, and you can listen, or you can give us feedback at those meetings, but we will be giving the same presentation at those meetings that we gave today, so it's not necessary to attend all three of them. Our next meeting here in Jefferson City is on December 7th, here in the same room. And if you want to RSVP, you can do so at the bottom of this page here, and that kind of helps us keep track of the number of people that are going to be attending. If you go back to the main page here, you can get involved by joining our advisory committee. You click on this button here. You can add your name and your email address, and you'll be signed up for the advisory committee, and everybody's welcome to join. Let's see here. And then the last box here is the be a part of the solution box. And if you want to submit comments directly to us, you can click on this button here. And it'll take you to our comment form where we have some questions for you to answer, and you can fill it out as much or as little as you know, you can provide as much or as little information as you want. This will help us get started with our beneficiary mitigation plan development. I would note that all the information that you would provide here would only be used for the development of the plan. So if you give us your name and your contact information, we can contact you if we have any questions about your comment form, but that's about all that we would use the information for. And at the bottom here, you can also upload any documentation that you would like to give us. And today, I do have a summary, let's see here, a summary of the comment forms that we've received to date. I'm not going to go into any detail as far as what kind of comments we received. I just wanted to put this up here to give you a relative idea of what kind of comments we've received so far. And with that, that ends the presentation portion of the agenda.
All right, does anyone have any questions? I have a few updates based on what everyone said. The fact sheets that were referenced are probably out because I'm a little chintzy and I only made 25 copies. So, but Emily showed you where to find it online. So if you did not get a copy of the fact sheet and you would like one, you can find it online and print it for yourself, or just read it online as well. If you read it online, the links are live, so you can just click on links that are there. Also, the listserv that Emily mentioned, we have been sending the notices of this meeting and this topic out to all our AIR program listservs, which gets about 3,000 people. I imagine when we scale down to more specific topics on the advisory committee, we will probably try just to use the Volkswagen listserv. So if you're not on the Volkswagen listserv, you can sign up how Emily showed you. You can also give your email address to any of this group right here, and we can add you as well. And as we have mentioned, the next several meetings in St. Louis, Kansas City, and Springfield will be in a very similar format to this one. I anticipate the next Jeff City meeting in December will be a little different. Depending on how many comments we received, I imagine more of a roundtable discussion. We'll kind of play that by ear and see how many comments we get before we set up the format for that. We're in this same room. We have our Missouri Air Conservation Commission meeting that morning, and then we'll rearrange the room for the Volkswagen meeting in the afternoon. So hopefully we'll have time for both. But as I mentioned earlier, we do want to hear from you. We schedule this meeting until 3:30. You can talk I'll probably cut you off at 3:30 just because I think everyone has other things to do. But you can talk as much as you want until then. So if you have questions for us, or if you would like to share comments, I would make note that you are being recorded, so I would like you to come up here. So there's a video recorder. We do intend to post this meeting online. If that bothers you, you can submit comments in writing. But I just wanted to let you know that that is occurring. So does anyone have any questions for me or the Volkswagen Group? Okay, all right. Go ahead, go.
Kevin Herdler, St. Louis Clean Cities. If we sign up for your advisory committee, will that be a conflict of interest if we either go after a project or hopefully assist you in the project?
No.
Okay, good.
Do you want to provide any more feedback on that? We reviewed that, and then we've had those several questions, but the intention is we just want to gather information. So, and we realize that most of the people interested are also probably going to be applying for projects, so that does not preclude you.
Right.
So,
Thank you.
and if you want to sign up to be on the advisory committee, obviously, to come to the meetings, but if you don't want to sign up because you're afraid you can't make too many meetings, you can still come to a meeting. They're public meetings, so if you're not officially signed up on the advisory committee, you can still participate in any of our meetings. So.
I already signed up. Last question is, when are you planning on starting these advisory committee meetings?
Well, this is officially the first one,
Okay.
so, but the December 7th one would be the first meeting where we don't feel like we have to give the background,
Okay.
so.
Thank you.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions, comments? Jeff? And again, it's kind of a formal situation today, but I do want to encourage discussion too, so.
Hi, Jeff Mark, Missouri Office of Public Counsel. We just had a question for the group. If you could speak a little bit about the non-attainment counties and how they fit into the overall picture as far as selection goes. And had one additional question. It'll come to me if you want to start
Yeah.
on that one. Okay.
That's right.
So can you guys hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay. So we do have one area of the state that's currently non-attainment. It's the St. Louis area, the 5 counties that has been historically non-attainment for several decades. So we are actually working through the redesignation process for that area to be redesignated as attainment. At the same time, there is a new standard that we're looking at where we would have a non-attainment boundary. So to answer your question, I think that's something that we want to consider. Looking at that area and seeing if it should have more or less money because of it being non-attainment. But that said, there's other areas of the state that historically have been non-attainment or that based upon 1 or 2 years of high ozone readings could be looking at non-attainment too. And ozone is a transport issue, so that's something that we also need to consider. So I'm not really answering your question, but other than to say that's something to think about, certainly.
Okay. The second question I have really pertains to the number of options. So there were options that included, ferries and various, air transport. Does DNR have a sense of the potential that exists currently in Missouri for those opportunities?
We're looking at our technical expert, Mark.
Yeah, this is Mark Lee with the AIR program. Jeff, it's a pretty good question. Over the years, we've done some projects with tugboats. We've never done any ferry projects, but I believe there's certainly some ferries that operate in the state, but I don't think there's too many. As far as aircraft service equipment, any airport that has ground support equipment that services aircraft in between flights, that's what that category is. So there's certainly several airports in the state that would qualify.
And I guess just as a follow-up to that, Mark, I guess one of the questions I'd have is, I noticed that government-owned projects get 100%, I guess, full allocation. But again, I just don't really have a sense whether or not, there's a lot of governmentally owned ferries or government-owned switch rails and so forth. I mean, maybe that's a non-issue, right?
I think that's a pretty good observation there, Jeff. I'm not aware of any government-owned
Okay.
ferries or switchers or tugboats for that matter. So
We're making progress.
if there were some, they would be eligible for up to 100%.
Okay, thank you.
I would chime in to some of the answers on that. Again, to reiterate, we're asking for your input on this. And so in the discussion, if a question comes up, well, how many tugboats are there out there? We can find that, and we can work with you to get that research. If we need more information to make some decisions, we'll get it. So if we need to find out how many government-owned there are, we've reached out to the Highway Patrol to get a list of school buses, for example, that would be eligible. We have some of that, but in anticipation, we wanted to have that information for future meetings. But if there's other information that we need to gather to make decisions, we'll do it, and we'll ask you all for help on some of those, so.
I would just add that the way that we communicate this meeting is how we've been communicating normally. If maybe there's groups that we don't know that are out there that should be at the table. So if you know of an industry group or an entity that we're maybe missing, I would love for you to give us their name and we can reach out to them and add them to the listserv. So.
Eric Holder, Independence Power and Light, City of Independence. I just had a question about the EV charging stations. I had read somewhere in the consent decree, I believe, that the funding for EV charging stations was capped at 15% of Missouri's allotment. So I just wanted to confirm about $6 million. That is correct?
I'm getting nods from the
Okay.
technical support staff.
Okay. And that's significant, so I just wanted to make sure. Also, I wanted to confirm the relationship between the Wilmington Trust and the DNR Air Pollution Control Program. Is DNR the sole awarding authority, or in terms of grants, or does Wilmington Trust have a role in approving those?
I'm looking at the general counsel who's been working on this, so. Here, you can have my chair.
I'll take yours. So DNR is the lead agency, will review the projects and determine whether or not they fit within our beneficiary mitigation plan. We will certify those to the trustee, and the trustee will distribute the funds. So the trustee does not have a say in, oh yeah, this looks like a great project for the state of Missouri, or not. That's up to us. We actually kind of certify that we're complying with every law that we need to comply with and everything when we submit those requests to the trustees, so.
Great. I actually have a whole page of questions, but I'll limit it. I'll limit it to the
I didn't
top.
see a whole lot of people standing up, so
I'll try and limit it. The other question I had was, will matching funds be required for award, or will proposals that have matching funds in them be of a higher, I guess, award success?
again, that's a question that we'll work out together. My personal opinion is I think if there are some matching funds available that stretch the dollars even further, that's probably a good thing. But we haven't made any of those decisions yet, so.
Okay. I guess this would probably be a similar category or question. How will the grant, I guess the award work? Will it be something where projects will be reimbursed after they're performed, or will it be upfront grant money?
It's a reimbursement, I believe. I'm looking.
Likely.
I think that we would maybe have the option to do in advance if necessary, but
Oh. Just pull your chair up.
That's why I scooted over. I scooted over for you.
I don't know why he thinks he should sit back there anyway.
Eric, I think we would have the option to do in advance if necessary, but I think, usually when we do these types of DERIC grant projects, it's always been on a reimbursement basis to keep that oversight over the project.
Then the other question I would have was, will there be grant money available for projects that don't necessarily involve mobile sources, but that would have an overall positive impact on air quality, and I think of things like public works projects for bike path construction that would encourage, the use of bicycles to go to work and those types of things. There's other ones, but that's just one example, so I'm just curious.
Want me to take that? So it's got to be one of those 10 projects that are on that list that's actually part of the consent decree, and no state has the option to go outside those 10 eligible categories.
Okay.
So
Good.
unfortunately, the 41 million can't be spent on those types of projects.
Okay. Let's look real quick to see if there's any other.
And some in the audience may have the same question as you, so unless someone's wanting you to sit down, I'd say go, keep asking.
All right. I guess I understood that we're kind of working together to come up with the process and the approval process and so forth. But I'm wondering if you can share anything with us about how a successful grant would be determined. I mean, is there anything that you have in mind, like areas with higher NOx ambient air concentrations will be favored for grant award over areas that have lower NOx concentrations? I'm just trying to get an idea of, will there be any ranking system that you can share with us now?
So the advisory committee, we're looking to the advisory committee to come up with the process and what should we give preference to in terms of the types of projects that we go after? Should there be a scoring system that we use, and what should we look at in that scoring system? Or maybe like with our school bus program under DERA, for example, we just do a drawing. And so anyone that meets the eligible criteria is eligible and is thrown in a drawing, and we just pick by chance which school districts get picked. So there's different options, and I think we'll be looking to the advisory committee to tell us what should we be looking at to pick the actual projects.
Gotcha.
And I think even though 41 million does sound like a lot, it's not going to go very far when you have a lot of people interested. So we will have to prioritize, but we would like to gather input on how to do that. So.
Okay. And I did think of one more. So in the category of medium to large diesels, I guess it'd be class 4 up to class 8. Is that does that cover all sorts of medium and heavy duty diesels? I mean, for example, at a utility, we have bucket trucks and things like that idle all the time or much of the time. Would that be as long as they meet that weight category? Are they eligible?
I believe so, Eric.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. Does anyone else have questions, comments? See, I told you weren't hogging the mic. Oh, does anyone on the phone have a comment or a question? Nope, all right. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul Brugman. Professionally, I'm an area manager for Cummins, and for most people familiar with the transportation industry, when you say Cummins, you think diesel. But Cummins as a company, two things there. They're very concerned about the environment, and they encourage employees to be active in their community, and so they're interested in employees like me being informed about what's going on, so they can provide information to those who may need to know as far as being a resource. But Cummins actually is all in as far as everything on the table as far as energy sources. In fact, you might have noticed in the news that they just announced they just launched their first diesel truck prototype, and they beat Tesla to the game, so they're very proud of that. But so they're all in as far as all the options, whether it's diesel, which they're best known for, or alternative fuels like natural gas or electric. But anyway, my approach to this is more from the standpoint of a taxpayer, and the last gentleman mentioned the term was used as there's going to be a scoring system. So that's kind of what I'm interested in, is how you're going to evaluate, what kind of metrics are going to be used to evaluate which products would kind of raise to the top. And I know, and us being in my profession and the group that's been talking about it, we've been looking at some scoring tools where you can evaluate, where you can break it down to the cost per reduction and NOx and particulate matter per year. So I don't know, just my opinion, I think that would be a high criteria, maybe in a hierarchy to look at it. But then going beyond that, there's also, within the funding, there's that 100% that goes to government vehicles versus private sector. And like I said, I kind of approach, my thinking of it is just from the standpoint of a taxpayer. So that, to me, is a strong one too. And I know we have some school districts represented here. So this is kind of the question part of it. What kind of metrics are you using? And when other factors come into it, like with school buses, while maybe they're not related, I know that transportation funding for schools has been reduced year after year after year, and now we have a source of funding. Would in addition to the metrics, would some of those considerations play into the decision-making process? So that's just my question and comment.
I think, again, the answer is we don't have any answers right now. So we want to hear from everyone. Obviously, there is going to have to be a metric system that we will have to come up with, hopefully, as a group, to decide how to distribute the funds and score these projects. It's hard to argue with replacing school buses. So, but yeah, there's a lot of discussion that we're going to have before we make any decisions. So.
Thanks.
Hi, David Albrecht with Kansas City Clean Cities, and this is something that I'm sure Darcy and Emily are already aware of because we've talked about it in prior meetings. For the better part of a year now, our office, as well as Kevin with St. Louis Clean Cities, we've been talking with stakeholders around the state about the settlement, what it looks like and what it's going to mean, et cetera, et cetera. Put out a white paper on it, meeting with people in Kansas, and so on and so forth. If there were one thing I was going to emphasize that was a key conclusion in our work on this, it would simply be, to the degree you can, it would be a good idea to maximize the required cost sharing from applicant organizations. The whole idea is a chance like this doesn't come along very often, and you want to maximize the number of clean fuel vehicles, the number of clean fueled fleets, the number of organizations that are able to buy into this technology and make it work for them. That's, I think, if there's just one thing I was going to say, and don't worry, I'll just say one thing, that would be the conclusion. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Mike?
Hello, everyone. So I'm Mike Saxton, Chief Commercial Officer with a company called Orange EV. We manufacture in Kansas City the first of the Class 8s that is all electric. It's the T-Series electric yard truck, also known as spotters, hostlers, et cetera. They've been commercially deployed for a couple years now from California to New York, from fully southern climates in LA all the way up to Buffalo and Chicago. So we've learned a few things as probably one of the heaviest users of these incentive programs, both on the voucher front and the reimbursement grant programs. A few thoughts. First, the more publicly recognizable vehicles are easy, school buses, and I'm certainly a fan of school buses, cleaning them up in the neighborhoods. However, if your objectives are NOx reduction, then you'd be shocked to find that there are quite a few other applications which are far more efficient for the dollars spent. And there may be not vehicles with which the general public is familiar. So be ready. Some of the projects may be less popular with the masses, but certainly more popular in the neighborhoods where these industrial vehicles operate. Yard trucks, for example, are container movers that work in distribution centers, rail intermodal sites, et cetera. And in contrast to a good number of the heavier vehicles which are more commonly known, neighborhood dump trucks, school buses, et cetera, which operate single shift for a few hours, okay? Moderate to light duty cycles. Vehicles like yard trucks tend to operate around the clock. They're hot seated and they can work in 3 shift operations 24/7 and are one of the greatest emitters of the criteria pollutants. So just be aware there are a lot of these maybe less publicly known vehicle types that would score well on some of those fronts. Further, when it comes to scoring criteria, NOx reduction, of course, is a primary. However, there's great latitude in the way the consent decree was structured and the objectives you might utilize in actually allocating funds. A couple thoughts there. One, since we've used a lot of these application programs, I would encourage that the process be as simple for the fleets and for you as possible. You'll rue the day you ask for a whole lot of information, make it tough on yourself to score every single application, and then go inspect and hold people accountable for all that detail. Also, the simpler you make it, the more you enable the lion's share of some of these operations to really participate, because most fleets don't have grant writing organizations, and so most fleets, especially the privately held regional firms that may be in a position to move more quickly, because as a single owner decision maker, if you force them into a complex application, they're going to need some help, or they're simply going to go, I don't get it. I'm not going to take the time on it to begin with. So please keep it simple for them and for you. Further, where NOx reduction is a clearly an objective, there's an opportunity to advance and expose neighborhoods and communities to some of these new technologies. So whether it's a yard truck, a school bus, or a bucket lift truck or something else, it's possible that you have some criteria simply that allow seeding the market. In some markets around the country, California, New York, for example, there are programs where the company and the vehicle are pre-approved, because it's known that there's a typical duty cycle and a typical NOx reduction, let's say, bang for the buck for the dollars they might provide. That pre-approval means instead of a lengthy application and a lengthy evaluation of the application, literally a couple pages and a few moments, and a decision can be made for all parties. That enables planning, budgeting, and a quicker decision. And again, to make it easier for them and for you, I would encourage you to think about the simplicity of the process, but B, maybe how you enable some of this pre-approval and use of other objectives that just concede the market, where you can. The reason I bring that up as an opportunity, sometimes it just takes getting a vehicle type into the hands of certain communities before they realize, holy smokes, with a vehicle, with the data coming off those vehicles, because electric trucks especially, you get a lot of operating data, before they all realize, holy smokes, it does work and it does deliver value, and then they can start making decisions without requiring the same degree of incentive dollars, and just exposing the community is a big deal. So maybe consider some of those other criteria in your scoring methodology. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate those comments.
Ashok Gupta from NRDC. Two questions. One around working regionally in terms of with other states. I'm just curious, are you having conversations with other states in terms of clearly around transport issues, the pollution is moving across borders, and there may be an opportunity to optimize by doing something jointly with Illinois or others, Kansas or other states?
We have had general conversations with other states just in our normal day-to-day business. We belong to a 8-state group called Sensera, which includes Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri, and Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana. And we were just recently at their fall meeting where we were discussing what all the 8 states' progress is on Volkswagen. I'd say about half of the states are at about the same spot we are or a little ahead, and the other half haven't done anything. So there is that opportunity to communicate with them and coordinate with them. We work regularly with those states, and there will be opportunities if it arises to continue that conversation. So it's a little early, so.
Right. And given, again, that $40 million sounds like a lot, but it isn't, I
right.
think the more we can do that, the better in terms of overall impacts and benefits.
And I know, for example, I believe Kansas only has 14 million, so they're our closest state, and they didn't get as much of the settlement because they didn't have as many cars. Iowa and Nebraska are very similar. So Texas has a lot, but we don't have a lot of interstate corridors with Texas. But we do have regular conversations with them on our normal day-to-day operations. So if something arose, we'd be able to continue that conversation. So.
And the second question was around front-loading the spending versus future years. As we know, this can be done over multiple years, but in order to, again, maximize and optimize benefits and getting the impacts sooner and accumulating them over 5-8 years, any thoughts in terms of how you'd like to do the spend rate in terms of if you have really good projects up front? I assume you're willing to invest more up front if there are really good projects available.
Yeah, we haven't.
Yeah, pick a mic.
Pick a mic here. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. You know, you don't want to delay because the sooner that we can get the benefits, the better. But that's definitely something we need to consider. We can't spend more than a third in the first year, 2/3 in the second year. But then, you know, and then of course there's the opportunity if other people don't spend their money that we would be able to do that. But as far as, you know, coming down and deciding which projects meet the best criteria to move with more quickly, that's another option, another item for discussion.
Okay, and one just last thing, in terms of the chicken and egg issue of infrastructure versus the actual vehicles, and I know there's a lot of interest in infrastructure, which is necessary to get people to do vehicles. I think, you know, just a comment really in terms of the balance, having the right balance here where we actually, in order to get the benefits, we actually need the vehicles out there. And so we need to find out who the partners could be on infrastructure to make sure we're also investing enough in really the vehicles in order to get the benefits, because that there's a balance, obviously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Asher. Any other questions, comments? Oh, David?
David Grimes, Southeast Missouri Regional Planning Commission. I liked having the DERA in there. There are things that aren't mobile that are putting stuff in the air. So I encourage you to consider those things. I'm speaking specifically, as Mark knows, of levee districts and the big engines that run pumps when the river comes up, which it do. Which brings me to a second question. And it sounds silly, but define government. Are political subdivisions of the state considered government, like, for instance, a levee district?
I think so, Deb,
Cool.
yes.
Okay, I like that. That's 100%. And then the third thing, and I think it's probably in the truck categories, but we've carved out special cases for school buses, for instance. I submit to you that the other thing that's out there that is the perfect recipe for creating pollution are the trash trucks. Every town has them. And so, you know, my guess is that we're going to have governments that are going to be coming in for these. And, you know, I'd like to see a little consideration for that. That's all I got.
All right. Thanks, David. No problem.
And if someone can riff off each other a little bit here, specific to infrastructure, for some vehicle types that have been commercially deployed and out there for a bit, especially mass transit or passenger vehicles, I think you'll find you have standardized infrastructure options. However, for the other vehicle types, especially the heavier duty applications like a yard truck, there is no standardized available service provider putting a charging station solution out there. Your OEMs, like Orange EV, are providing their own. And frankly, it's cheaper and more reliable, and it does just what we need it to because it's fundamentally different than what you're used to. So please think of them differently. The infrastructure for a yard truck solution, and like many, you're talking about the truck, the charging, if incremental, because sometimes it may be a part of what you get, and then the electrical infrastructure. The charging question is the one I'm tackling here, but for most of our yard truck solutions, there is a third-party J1772, for example, charging station. It's more expensive and it has functionality we don't need, so we build our own, and it's actually quite simple. So just maybe divorce the two and know that it could be brought by the OEM for the vehicle. And I forgot the other thing.
You can come back when you remember, so. Hello?
I'm only going to talk till 3:30 and I'm going to stop.
Okay.
All right.
Jim Hearing with Spire. Just a quick question. You mentioned the research team is collecting a lot of information on fleet sizes, and do you think that that information could be released publicly and put on the website as well?
When we have it, we've asked for some information on school buses. That's as far as we've gotten. I don't think we've received it yet, but yes, all our information will become public, so.
All right. Another question is, I assume part of this process is to try to determine how much funding goes to each type. Is that so I think Spire definitely supports a metric-based system and kind of looking at the cost per nitric oxide ton reduced. Makes a lot of sense, and we really would heavily consider trying to make sure we look at a wells to wheel analysis and make sure we look at source energy as well, which would be important too. And just a clarification question, I have to look at the consent decree, but are natural gas fueling infrastructure also included as an eligible expense of any of these types?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. All right. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Jeff Mark with Office of Public Counsel again. As far as the criteria or, items that committee is considering, we'd offer up that we're just pointing out again that Missouri is largely a fossil fuel intensive state. So if we're generating, our energy, through coal or through natural gas, even for that matter, around the clock electrification isn't going to have as large of an offset for NOx emissions than it otherwise would if you're just charging at night, if you're just charging one time of the night. And I think that's largely the argument for school buses, right? Because they are only operating maybe an hour or two a day. But in terms of that charging's taking place and being offset with wind power if it's coming at night, depending on where you're at. The only other thing that, at least right now, that I'd offer up for consideration, and I don't think it's been said yet, but to the extent that public charging stations are considered, and I don't really have a play on this one way or the other, just I'm more curious that you consider wireless charging. As it stands right now, the iPhone 8 is a wireless feature. If we're moving forward and we're looking at these are assets that are going to be in place over the next 10, 15 years, I think it probably behooves us to consider that in the application.
Thanks, Jeff. Mike, did you remember? You were hovering, so you must have remembered. That's fine.
This one is
That's what we want.
leading with a question. So commercially deployed versus still in development. I'm curious what your bent is going to be on the applications you would want to receive. Are they for currently commercially deployed vehicle or other solutions, or are you looking for R&D projects, things that have not been done before, but which are being in some way proposed to your fleets? I have an opinion, but it's a question.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if it's an eligible project under the consent decree, that it's open. When you're saying an R&D type project, so the only thing that they're eligible is, replacements of the truck or replace the engine in the truck. And then if it's electrical, then the infrastructure would also be eligible. But
Well, so this is why I'm asking. This is a lot of money, and you have a lot of manufacturers that are now finally getting into the game. And they have started to design things which have not been commercially vetted, they haven't been put through the paces in the hands of the users. The question is, do you want to use these dollars for R&D purposes, for receiving applications on those things which have not yet been built and put in the hands of an actual commercial customer before, or do you want to limit it? Because you will change dramatically the way you manage these things and the expectations. If the thing doesn't work, or the site vehicle operators won't use it because it doesn't work, you won't get the NOx benefit. Whereas if there's history that demonstrates something's already been commercially proven, especially if there's public testimony to that fact, you have a different expectation as to whether or not you will realize the objectives. NOx reduction as an example.
I think you make a pretty good point there, Mike, that, maybe we should come up with some minimum eligibility criteria for the replacement type engines and trucks that are allowed to be used, so that, fleet owners don't go out there and wind up getting a lemon or something that doesn't work, or get tricked by, faulty manufacturers that haven't been proven themselves. But right now we've made no decisions on that, but I think it's a valid point to consider, and we appreciate the comment.
Welcome. Thanks.
I don't see anyone else jumping up. Kevin? Yeah.
Maybe just comment on Mike's comments that he made. Here we go. Kevin Erler again from St. Louis Clean Cities. We've been down this road. Kansas City and I and several others have been doing this for 25 years. We do want to make sure that whatever technology we use is possibly EPA certified or CARB certified, because I can tell you I've got many big corporations that have got vehicles sitting on the lot that they can't use anymore because that company's disappeared and they can't buy parts. So the last thing we want to do is run into a situation where a company's got 10 vehicles sitting there and they're just rotting away. So, my comment is that we definitely make sure that it's EPA certified or CARB certified. Something to protect us.
Well, this is all good comments. This is exactly what we want. We want feedback from you, things that we might not have thought of. Anyone on the phone have a comment or question? I can't. I should be able to hear him even if. Anyone on the phone? Okay. All right. I guess I have a couple things. I was pulling the table while you were talking as well. Our next several meetings in Springfield, Kansas City, and St. Louis, we do intend to give the general presentation, but have this feedback as well. So we anticipate having some similar discussions. However, our next meeting in Jefferson City, it's not till December, but that will be here before we know it. Wednesday is November. I keep reminding myself that. So if you have ideas for what you want at that meeting, one of our thoughts is we're going to gather all the comments and try and put them together so we can share them with you. We're getting comments on the web. We're getting feedback from you today. But if there's something you want to see, a presentation that we can provide you at that meeting, please let me know. You can contact me. You can send comments on the web. We're just interested in if there's any information you want to see, we will be more than happy to provide it. If you all have some information you want to share with the group, I know a couple of you asked if you could come do presentations today, and I apologize. I read a couple of those emails this morning. I was out unexpectedly and wasn't able to respond to my emails. But if you have some items that you want to share with the group in a presentation, just let me know, and we can probably arrange that for the next meeting. Any comments on that right now of the next Jefferson City meeting, or any other questions? Okay, I'm just going to run down this. I think I answered that already. Let's see. I do want to remind, I don't think we've talked about this yet. We are preparing a technical survey to send out to the Volkswagen listserv. It's just a heads up that we're going to be sending it out to get some feedback from you on that. So I don't know the time frame on that, probably the next couple weeks. But that's kind of the next step in our process as well, so. All right. Julia.
Hi, Julia Kadich-Mudd again from the General Counsel's Office. And Mr. Grimes asked a question about levy districts and political subdivisions, and my trusty co-counsel here pointed out to me that government is defined in Appendix D3. It does not specifically list political subdivisions, but having done, not exhaustive, but a lot of research on what is and is not a political subdivision for different purposes over probably the past 5 years, I'll let you know that I'll look into that, and we'll think about it a little bit and get back to you on what is and is not considered government-owned. So.
Right.
It is. That's why I thought I'd clarify.
We will have that information at our next Jeff City meeting, and we can provide that, so. All right. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? Well, again, if you just don't want to provide them verbally, we do have our form on the website. You can also email any of us. I didn't bring business cards, but I think most of the rest of the staff did. But you could also, my email address and phone number is pretty easy to find, and I can give it to you. So feel free, our Volkswagen team will hang out here for a while. Feel free to come talk to us after the meeting. And we look forward to seeing you all at the December 7th meeting, and some of you at our St. Louis, Kansas City, and Springfield meetings. I know you've signed up already, so. Any other last questions, comments? Okay, all right. Thank you all. I really appreciate the feedback, so.